Thank you, James. Thank you for the amazing talk. And I just wanted to say it's so great to see so much engagement from Xamarin community. And our next talk will be especially interesting for ASP.NET folks because Luz Carter will tell us about Xamarin mobile development for ASP.NET developers. So welcome, Luz Carter.
Thank you. It's great to be here. So let's share my screen. So, come on, share that one. There we go. Let's kick things off. So hi everyone. Welcome to my talk on Xamarin mobile development for ASP.NET developers. Actually, before we do that, let's just double check that I haven't got my camera on. Let's save some bandwidth. There we go. Right, try again. Cool. So as I said, welcome to my talk on Xamarin mobile development for ASP.NET developers. I'm Luz Carter. I'm a software developer at dunnhumby, a customer data science company. As any of you that know me will know, I am quite a pedant for the English language. In fact, I bugged James with fixes to his blog so much he made me an admin. So this is not a typo. My company really does start its company name with a lowercase d. I started at dunnhumby back in 2018 as a ASP.NET backend developer. And I, in fact, now dabble in QA. So I don't even write code as a day job anymore. But I've known and loved Xamarin since 2015. And in fact, I learned it before I got to know ASP.NET. So I understood some of the concepts by finding analogies between Xamarin and ASP. So what's quite funny about this talk is that this is a complete switch of that. We're going to learn about ASP.NET. Sorry, we're going to learn about Xamarin with a knowledge of ASP.NET. I'm also a Microsoft MVP and a Twilio champion. And along the bottom here, you will see a few handles. So at LuzCarter1 is my Twitter handle. I keep my DMs open constantly. So if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Coding with Luz is my Twitch handle where I try to stream weekly, but don't hold me to it. I've streamed a lot less since I stopped coding because imposter syndrome got the better of me, but hey, the summer's coming. Let's try again. If you type Coding with Luz into YouTube, you will also find my videos. I don't have enough subscribers to have a / Coding with Luz, but I put Coding with Luz in all the video titles, so you should be able to find it. Then lastly, along the right here, we have my website where I blog occasionally, not as much as I should. So we're used to the .NET ecosystem. We love it and use it already. You would have seen, if you watched the keynote this morning, you see Amanda showed a much better version of this diagram, but it's still a great diagram. And as you can see, .NET supports pretty much anything you can think of, from desktop to mobile to gaming, AI, you name it, .NET can probably do it. And you're used to web. You know, when you're doing your ASP.NET development, you know, it falls under the web category. But as you would have seen from the talk title, today is about mobile. So we're going to look at this part of the platform. Why would we want to talk about it? Well, millions of people have smartphones in their pockets and they, you use them every day on a constant basis. I know I do. And having a website is great, and I know responsive web is great and everything, but you want to actually make use of the platform features available on smartphones to give your customers the best possible experience. You could use something like a PWA, but it wouldn't give you access to the native features of the devices to give your users the best experience. You could do something like React Native, Cordova, PhoneGap, or some of the other cross-platform options out there. But we love .NET and we want to stick with .NET. And that's where Xamarin comes in. So Xamarin is a cross-platform native app experience written in C# or F#. You can deploy it everywhere. So you can see from this diagram that you can do iOS, Android, macOS, watchOS, tvOS. But there's more than that. It also does, it's not mentioned on here, other things like Tizen, which is Samsung's platform, so you can do watch and TV with them as well. So you really can put Xamarin everywhere. And the great thing is that because it's .NET, and it's cross-platform, it allows you to do code sharing. We've got the shared business logic, which comes by default out of the box with Xamarin. And then optionally, you can do Xamarin Forms. So what Xamarin Forms is shared UI as well. So you can use a dotNET standard library for your shared business logic, and then you've got, as part of that, the shared UI and Xamarin Forms. Xamarin Forms is my personal favorite, so that's what we're going to focus on today. So out of the box, what does your app look like? Yeah, the structure of your solution will be different on the different platforms. So what do you actually see? So if we switch desktops now, I've used multiple desktops for this because I don't have a Stream Deck or anything to do fancy button presses, so desktops it is. So here we've got a simple ASP.NET solution. So I'll just zoom into that. Oh, come on, magnifying glass. There we go. So we've got our solution here. It's just a web project, and inside of it, it's just that one project. That is our ASP.NET web project, and then you've got the files and folder structures that you'd expect. So, for example, you've got startup.cs. So this is where you do things like dependency injection, configuration, and things like that. Yeah, it's just out of the box. It's what you'd expect. It does all the different configurations that you need, all there set up for you. Then you've got the program file. So that contains main, because under the box, all an ASP.NET project is a console app with a web builder on top of it, like an extra layer. So you still have main inside of program.cs like you'd expect from your console apps. And this is where you'd go to find where the program starts and does other configuration. But yeah, this is where you go to start. So what about Xamarin? So if we go across to here now, this solution, which I'll zoom in again, there we go, is our out-of-the-box Xamarin Forms project. So you get 3 projects and possibly 4. So the reason I say 4 is that you've got these platform-specific projects here, which I'll go through in a minute. If you create the project on Visual Studio for Windows, it will give you the option to add UWP as well, which is obviously Universal Windows Platform, so that you can create Windows 10 and even Xbox apps, because Xbox is just UWP under the hood. Not actually tried making an Xbox app yet, but I might do it for a laugh. So what's actually going on in these projects? So we'll start with the platform specific, as we call them. You don't need to worry too much about what's going on here, but just in terms of understanding where it starts, this is quite a good one to look at. So in iOS, we have app delegate, which is a bit like that main that you saw. So we've got some code in here. Don't worry too much if it looks a bit scary with all the comments. The main thing to look at here is that it initializes Xamarin Forms and then calls the load application new app, which we'll see where that is shortly. Then on the Android project, it's very similar. You just go into the main activity class, it initializes Xamarin Forms and calls the new app. So rather than calling any files or UI in the platform specific project, it's calling up to our shared project. So if we have a look at our shared project again, so this is the crux of the interesting stuff. So most of the work that you do will happen inside this shared project. And the one I want to show you first is this app.xaml.cs. So if you've ever done Razor pages before, this idea of a dot extension .cs won't be unusual to you. Xamarin Forms also uses partial classes, or code behind, as they're called in both. So if we have a look at our app xaml.cs now, you'll see this app. So this app constructor is what we saw being called from here. And so it goes ahead and calls the new main page. So this is where you set up what the root page of your application will be, aka the first page that you see. So in ASP.NET, you might know this from launch settings and setting, the default root. Normally it's index, but of course you can set it to be something else. So we've got it running here. It just calls main page, which is a file here, which we'll come on to later. So let's go back to the slides. So that's our app structure, and we've talked about what you get out of the box. But let's talk architectural patterns. We've talked about the app structure, but what about architecture? Because especially as your solutions get bigger and you add more and more projects to it, I know that when I was doing back-end development last year, the project that I worked on, I think had 64 projects in the solution. So, yeah, the bigger your project gets, the more important architecture is, because architecture plays a key role in the maintainability of our apps, ensuring easy code reuse, readability, and maintainability. I'm sure we've all opened some code and gone a bit like, what is going on? So that's why architecture is really important. So we know MVC. Well, you may be familiar with MVC. Of course, with ASP.NET, you get different types of projects that you can create, but the one that we're going to look at is MVC. So MVC, as you can see here, stands for Model View Controller. The model handles our business logic. Then you've got the pages, and as you'll see later, the view, which is the pages, sorry, and as you'll see later, our website uses Razor pages. Then you've got the controller down here, which sets up the routes and acts as a messenger between the model and the view. And if we have a look at that in action, we'll go back to that counter website. So I'm just going to quickly run it so you can see what it's doing, and then we'll talk about how it's doing what it's doing. So just kick it off here. Hopefully I made enough sacrifices to the demo gods today and it works on my side. Hey, there we go. So this is just a simple counter. I will zoom in slightly. You've just got a button, click the button, and the number increments. Pretty boring, pretty simple. But how's that working? So you've got this MVC. So we'll start with at the lowest level, which is as I like to think of it, as the models. So all I did was create an increment model that just has a property of count equals 0, because most counts start at 0. We're developers, everything's 0 indexed, right? Well, unless you're American, in which case the ground floor is first, but simple enough. So we've got our increment model. Then if we go up one in the tree, as it were, obviously it's not a sort of actual hierarchy, but I like to think of it as a tree in different levels. So we'll look at the controller. So I've just got a simple counter controller here. All that does, a lot of it is out of the box code, but we've just got this property here, private property called int. Then we've got the index where we create that model, set its count to be the count value, and then return the view. Then, of course, we have an HTTP post increment endpoint that does pretty much the same, except it increments the count and then returns the view, calls that index, and then passes it in that model. The reason that we do that is because, obviously, every time you click the button, which you'll see in here, it goes to, there you go, counter. Yeah, so we've got the page here. The button is a submit button with a form within a form. So obviously it refreshes the page each time, so you just need to be able to keep that number consistent so that it actually counts upwards. Otherwise, every time you just click the button, it stays 0. You see here that you've got some Razor binding syntax between the page and the model. This is so that you can pass that data around. In this case, it's the count. All pretty straightforward stuff. All it was a button that you clicked and the number goes up. So let's just go back to our slides again. That was MVC. But the architectural pattern that Xamarin Forms uses is actually something called MVVM. It doesn't automatically use it out the box, but as you start to make more complicated apps, you will find that MVVM is your best friend. A lot of apps that you see developed out there will use MVVM. You know, a lot of the code samples that you would have seen today, I'm sure no doubt had MVVM in them. I know James uses it a lot. It's great. So the M part is, again, still model, and it's still a business logic. The view is still pages, except rather than being a Razor page or any other type of page, it's a Xamarin Forms content page. Then you've got the view model. This talks between the view and the model. And then it still uses data binding, except rather than being the razor bindings like you saw in the counter, it uses Xamarin's own data binding. And you'll see this in action later in a demo. So we've talked about the architecture of the page, but how do we actually go about starting to build the UI and putting all those components together? So you've got two options. You've got XAML or C#, or F#, of course. So with the XAML, it's obviously it's an extensible application markup language, I think. If you've ever done anything like UWP development before, you might be familiar with XAML. It's not the same dialect, it is Xamarin Forms XAML, but there's still a lot of similarities. It's still very intuitive and easy to get started with. And then, of course, you've got C# or F#. So you don't just have to use XAML to declare your UI, you can also actually declare the UI in code. And you've got all these different building blocks that you can put together, and both are an option how you do it. There's no limitations. It's not that what you can do in one you can't do in the other. It's fully consistent. So let's just have a look at a demo of our building blocks. So if I just cheat here and go to here. Actually, let's start with the other example first, because that'd be easier. Nope, wrong one. There we go. So you would have seen this earlier. This is the counter I showed you. So let's just have a look at it running, and then you can see what it looks like. I was having problems earlier with iOS build, so I just quickly made sure it was on the app. So if we just load the app here, I promise, take my word for it, this is the app. So it's just a simple counter again with a button. You click it, the number goes up. So we've seen how it works. Let's look at how it's put together. Oh, not that one. So many desktops, so easy to get it wrong. There we go. So how's it put together? Well, as I mentioned earlier, out of the box, it calls main page. And for a simple app like this that's not using MVVM and is just a simple example, using main page was fine because it's a single page application. So it uses Xamarin Forms content page, as I mentioned. Then it's got a stack layout which dictates the order of the page. So stack layout, stack things one on top of the other. There are other types like grid, for example, which you'll see in action later. In fact, you'll see it in the next demo. So we've got the label here and a button. Pretty straightforward. Set the text, give it a name so we can refer to it, set some stuff about where it lives, and then a button that says when you click it, call this method. So if we go into the code behind, you can see we've just got a private int. And then again, we just that method that we call when you click the button. All it does is increment the count, and then that label that we named, you just set the text to be the count as a string. So it's still just a few lines of code and pretty straightforward. And yeah, again, you can have a counter just like that, pretty quick. So what about if you're doing it in code? So again, I cheated and did a here's what I prepared earlier style. So this is just the same app. I apologize for the terrible design, but again, you just click a button and the number goes up. So it's the same concept, it's a button, a label, the number goes up. But you'll see that it's written in C# and we can achieve exactly the same thing. So if we go back to here, that one. That. There we go, cool. So this here, if we have a look, we've got the solution with multiple projects. This one does have UWP in it because I created it in Windows. Again, you've got the app XAML. It's still a Xamarin Forms project. I didn't do anything different to create it just because it's not using XAML for the pages. It's still an app, still got everything you'd expect. It's just when we set the root page, we're actually calling counter page, which, as you'll see here, is just a C# class, just a plain old C# class. Nothing fancy about it. It extends Xamarin Forms content page. Cool. Again, it's got int, but rather than using XAML to declare the components, we've got it declared in the code itself. So we've still got a label, we've still got a button. we still set properties on the label, such as text. In our case, we set it to be the string value of that count property. We've got a button, just like you'd expect, with some text on it. And then we set up an event handler for when the button's clicked. In this case, it's calling this method here. Then I decided to put this inside of a grid, just to make laying it out easier. And so we declare it in code. It's just setting it up with some columns and some rows, then adding the label to it and the button and just telling it where to place those items, setting the content to be and then setting the content to be the grid. At the bottom here, we've got that private method. It's exactly the same as you saw before. Increase the count by 1 and set the text to be that value as a string. Cool. If we, so we're going to just do this. So that's both ways that you can do it. You can do it in code or XAML, which gives you a lot of options. XAML is the most common that you'll see. Most people I know, including myself, use XAML, and most of the docs are done in XAML. And of course, you can, if you watched Maddie's session before, you'll know about a load of the amazing things coming to XAML, like hot reload and hot restart. So XAML is probably the best place to start. But if you, for whatever reason, do choose to do C#, that is fine. I know very good Xamarin developers who write C# UIs, so the choice is yours. So we've seen the building blocks, but how do we make better looking applications? You know, so these images here are just a couple of pictures that I stole of apps. So Stephen, who you would have watched give a talk earlier, he's made this really cool app here. And then my friend Kim Philpott also does really cool apps. And again, this is another app that he put together. And as you can see, they look much more professional than my terrible attempts, because you can start adding styling to make things look better. But when it comes to how you apply that styling, you've got a few options of how you can start making it look better. So you can add attributes in the individual components, which you saw in the app before, my counter app, where there were attributes on the XAML for the color, the font size, even the location of where the component was positioned on the page. You can also do page-wide styling declared in the XAML file, or you can just declare it at the top of the page, or you can do app-wide styling in app.xaml, which, as you start doing larger applications where there's multiple pages and you no doubt want a consistent theme, this is where you start. Then there's CSS support. Now, we all know that CSS is a bit contentious in mobile, and a lot of people have opinions, but it is an option that I wanted to share with you, because as web developers, you know, CSS is something you're familiar with. It is a subset of the web CSS. It's not everything you can do in the CSS for your websites you can do in Xamarin's implementation of CSS, but it's still an option for you. And one of the cool things as well is that you can control the styling based on the media. So you might be used to something like media selector, where you might control it based on screen size or whether it's a phone. We have something called on-device idiom. So you can say, oh, if I'm on a TV or a tablet, layout like this. If you're on, or look like this. If you're on a watch, look like this. And the reason for that will be literally just the sheer change in screen size and what you can fit in. So you imagine, you know, for example, I've got a 55-inch TV. The amount of things I could fit on a page is vast compared to something like my Apple Watch. If you try to fit the same number of components on both, on an Apple Watch it would look stupidly cramped, and on a TV it would probably just look empty. So you do sometimes want to start thinking about things like how you handle the sizes on a different platform. It might be that you have an almost menu and sort of detail when you select a menu item kind of layout on a tablet or a TV, but on a watch you maybe just want to show a menu, for example, of just a few buttons, and then it takes you to the individual pages rather than showing you too much at once. Just have a look at how you might beautify your applications. So as you saw earlier in my counter example, we just set attributes on the individual component. So as you can imagine, this only applies to that one label on this one page. Again, with the button, I didn't do anything fancy with the styling apart from the font size. So that's great. That's one way of doing it. The other thing you can do, and wish me luck here because this didn't go very well earlier, just gonna zoom in. We're just going to switch branches quickly to something called CSS. This wouldn't, let's see, right, let's reload this. Let's see if the demo gods are on my side. Oh, look, they are. Would you believe it? Cool. The checkout failed earlier, so I thought this was going to go wrong. I was prepared to open it in Visual Studio Code, but we're okay. I mentioned before about the page-wide styling that you could apply at the top of a page. So this would fall under this content page resources tag, I believe. I might be wrong, so I do apologize. I don't ever do it like this, so I could be wrong. But as you can see, we just declare a style sheet. So we've got the same components again. We've got a label with some text. We set its name. We've got the button. It calls the same method with the same text on it, but there's no attributes around the styling. And that's because, as you can see here, we have a style sheet and set its source to a file called styles.css. So if we just have a quick look at styles.css, it's as you'd expect. This is a pretty bare bones CSS file, but we're saying on the label, set the font size to 70 and the color to aquamarine. So it's still the same as you would have seen in the XAML. And then on the button, again, we just do the font size. So it's achieving the same goal, but with CSS. Then, of course, we've got app-wide styling. So I'm going to jump to an app that I did not write. So here we have a app that James put together, actually. So thanks, James, called Monkey Finder. He makes much prettier, much more functional apps than I do. So I thought, since I don't even write code for a living anymore, I'll borrow his. So here we've got our app.xaml, and once we've been through this, I'll show you what it looks like when it's running. But we've just got a resource dictionary that sets some application values. So we've got what is equivalent of key value pairs here to set some colors. So give it a name and a value. Then we have a style. So we're saying that you can apply it to a button. So you could set this target type to a label or whatever else you want to style, and then give it a key. So you can say, if you're writing your button, for example, you can say that the style is button outline, and then it will apply these properties under here. So it will set the background color, the text color, which is a static resource. So that's referring to these colors up here. Then you've just got other properties that you can set. So it's setting a border width, a height request, corner radius, I believe in the web world is called border radius, but yeah, corner radius and border radius are the same thing. And then visual material is just saying that regardless of whether it's on Android, iOS, or UWP, apply Android's material styling. So it will look the same regardless of the app. Because out of the box, Xamarin is native, which means that when it's built down to the components on an app level on the phones, you wouldn't, or devices, you wouldn't have a clue whether it was Xamarin or native tooling. And so it will have the native look and feel of those platforms. So this visual property just lets you apply the same Android material design across the platforms. So if we have a look at that running now to see how it looks, later on we'll go into a bit more detail about this application. But I just wanted to show you what's happening. So we'll quickly just run this now. So I'm going to do a here's what I prepared earlier style. So we can minimize that and we can go to Monkey Finder. So this has got the button theming that you saw before with the yellow outline and the white background. If we click it, it will go ahead and bring up some monkeys and some details and very pretty images of monkeys, because we love monkeys in the Xamarin community. Monkeys are hot property. So that's just the app, and you can find the closest if you want to. We can allow it to search on the internet, but that might take too long. So we'll come back to that afterwards if we've got time. So if we just jump into the code again and we can have a look how it was done. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of apps written in Xamarin Forms use the MVVM architecture, and this app is no different. So we've got our view, which is got, don't worry too much about this, but yeah, we've got a grid. So you saw me declare a grid in C#, and now you can see it in action in XAML. Then you've got the list view, which is just displaying those items. It's got Xamarin Forms data binding, and you declare it with these brackets in the word binding. And then you can scroll down and there's the list view and there's other bits going on. You set the grid and the image and whatnot. So it's all fairly straightforward. It's just using XAML with some data binding. If we look at the code behind briefly, you'll see that we set something called the binding context, which is just saying to it, hey, this is where you go and find the properties for what it should look like. Sorry, not what it should look like. Where you set the bindings, it's going to look for the properties of those bindings to know what to display and how to, what to do. And that's where it's saying, hey, go to the view model. So if we have a look at that view model, we have this monkeys view model. If you look here, it actually extends something called base view model, because with data binding, you need to do updates so that not only does it know that this properties, this UI component is looking at this property, but when something changes, you need it to know about it, and it uses iNotify property changed. You may have seen this before. It's just C#, it's not Xamarin. It comes from the system namespace, and it just has a few properties on it which are shared, but of course we want to look at the view model for the actual monkey view model that extends it. So it's just got some commands, so when the button is clicked, it's got that list of monkeys, and then we just set some details. So these options down here, this code is available online, and I do share it. I'll share it later, so don't worry too much about what's going on. But it's just plain old CLR. What's it? Plain old POCO, isn't it? Plain old C# object. I don't know, but yeah, it's just C#, and it's a view model with some properties with data binding built in. All fairly straightforward stuff. And then at the model level, we've just got a monkey with some properties on it. It uses newtonstuff.json. So again, just a really great C# library, nothing Xamarin specific. So we've seen that running, and we've seen how it's built with MVVM and the styling. So if we go back to the slides again. So I just want to take a few minutes to talk about some other things that might matter to you with your applications. So native features. You may well kind of be used to some of these things for stuff like geolocation. I know a lot of the time when you want to achieve certain things, you would grab a JavaScript library and start doing that. And wanting native features is no different in Xamarin. In fact, I'd say it's even more important because you're using devices with extra features like cameras and battery life and whatnot. And that's where something called Xamarin Essentials comes in. So Xamarin Essentials is a really great source of sort of shared libraries for, APIs for native features. So a lot of the time with Xamarin, if you want to, or previously before Xamarin Essentials, a lot of the features you'd have to write custom controls to achieve that, which you'd have to go into the platform level and write native code, as it were, but in C# for the things in. So iOS, it might be a UI something. In Android, you'd have to do something else, and you'd declare those components, how it's done, and then you'd have it in the shared that you'd reference, and when it's run on those platforms, it would look in the shared project. But that gets confusing, and it's quite complicated to implement. So what happened was a load of generous people in the community, often with James involved, would create libraries so that you didn't have to worry about how to do it on those platforms. You just call it from your shared code. And as more and more of those plugins were created, out came Xamarin Essentials. So Xamarin Essentials is now automatically included as a NuGet in all new Xamarin Forms projects. So you already have access to all these great features out of the box. So whether that's accelerometer, the file system, connectivity, battery life, I think there's 60 plus APIs available now in Xamarin Essentials. So there's so much to cover. And Essentials is 100% linker safe. So your app will only include the parts of Essentials that you're actually using. So if you're looking at all of these and thinking, oh my God, having all of these available in my app must cause it to be giant and take ages to download and forever to open. Nope, not to worry. None of that bloat is there because the linker strips out anything that you're not using. If you are interested in Xamarin Essentials, James does a whole series called Xamarin Essentials API of the Week, which I'll share a link to later, which shows you how to get up and running, usually with just a few lines of code, sometimes even one. And you can get started straight away making use of some of these features, which can be really, really powerful. Another thing that's important is authentication, because your personal identity is a key part of both websites and mobile apps. Logging in is so common these days, you don't even think about it. I mean, today I think I've logged into Twitter, Facebook, email, Nintendo Online, because Animal Crossing. So it's important. So what can Xamarin do? So like with websites and things, there's a lot of social authentication that you can implement. It's just C#, so you can log in with your Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, or even use, rather than social authentication, do Microsoft authentication library with Azure AD B2C. Well, what's cool is that Azure AD B2C not only handles who you are, but what you have access to within Azure, such as other services, which brings me nicely onto authorization. So you're used to that little buddy right there, cookies. Cookies is what you use to, no doubt, to store lots of little snippets of information about your users, whether it's information they want to remember, like passwords and usernames, or something else. And you want to do the same in Xamarin, but it doesn't use cookies. And so I mentioned a good example that I quite like to explain this stuff is a switch on your app for remembering your username. So you might have a login page and you might say, remember me. So you can bind the is toggled property of the switch to a property and then store that. And that's where Xamarin Essentials preferences comes in. Preferences gives you almost the equivalent of cookies, but obviously they work differently under the hood, but the concept of having somewhere to save small snippets of data. So preferences is really easy to get started with, as you can see from this code snippet here. So you've got this, you could have it bind to a bool property called remember me. And if you want to actually get the value, so when the app starts, it sets the toggle to whatever it was previously, you just call preferences.get, the name of the property you want to fetch, and then a default value. Of course, you want it to be false as a default. So if it can't get the value out, or one hasn't been set yet, it's just false. To set it, it's just the same. You just call set, one line of code again, what you want to call it, so the key and then the value, and then just obviously a bit of error handling. Yeah, that's fine. I can be done in 1 minute. We have one slide left. So we've got the so we've talked about the how you'd log in and how you'd remember things, and we've talked about all this stuff that you can do with Xamarin. But you're probably thinking, but Luce, we're web developers, and not so long ago we heard about something called experimental Blazor mobile bindings. So what the experimental Blazor mobile bindings is it uses Razor syntax to define UI components and behaviors, and it's based on Xamarin Forms, so you'll see some similarities. There's stack layouts, there's labels, there's buttons. But I still like Xamarin, and I still think Xamarin has a place, especially because the Blazor stuff is experimental. But if you do have an interest in it, then there was, of course, a Focus on Blazor event back in January. The recordings are available on I believe it'll be Channel 9's YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch a session on the Blazor mobile bindings if you want to learn more. So today we've talked about two parts of the platform. We've looked at web and mobile and how you can use your love and knowledge of C# and .NET to get started with Xamarin. It's really cool. It's really exciting. Hopefully you get as excited by it as I do and you're keen to get started. Here we have a bit.ly link which just takes you to a gist, whatever you want to say, on GitHub with some links in it. So that's the docs, James's Xamarin API of the week, Xamarin 101, which is an amazing series to help you get started, also Xamarin Forms 101, and just some other stuff to get started. And with that, thank you very much. I'll take time for questions. Hopefully they're not too difficult.
Thank you very much, Bruce. We're at time, so we have some great questions and we will follow up with them on Twitter. And now I'm heading it back to James, who has our next speakers.